Hello, BookTube and all Repairman Jack fans. My name is Nathan. Thank you so much for watching. This is my longer discussion video for Book 3 in the Repairman Jack series, Conspiracies. This is one of my absolute favorite books in the entire series, so I'm excited to talk about it. And just in case you didn't know, I'm reading all of the Repairman Jack books, for the most part in publication order, posting 2 videos a week on each book. So I'm going through a book a week, and then there's a short spoiler-free review video, and then a longer discussion video for that. So, Conspiracies is such a terrific book in this series. It makes the series, like, it introduces Jack and you as the reader into this massive cosmic battle that's going on, and you're kind of learning little bits at a time, but by the end of Conspiracies, then you realize there is something so much bigger going on than just Jack's little fixes that he's doing and this little like repairman business that he has going on, that you're starting to see him get pulled into this cosmic struggle. He's not entirely aware of exactly what his role is at this point, but he sees that there's something much bigger than himself at work here. And it's so much fun. So I had mentioned it last week in the short spoiler-free review video that Legacies doesn't really seem to touch on the supernatural or the secret history of the world or the adversary cycle, but Conspiracies does. But Conspiracies is also doing some really interesting stuff that, in addition to getting introduced to all of these characters that we're going to see, or several characters that we see later on, you get a reworking of other books. So you have really a reworking of the Tomb. You know, when you're reading the Tomb, then you think, okay, well, there's the Rakoshi monsters, but they're really separate from this cosmic struggle. But, like, I mean, if you know the series really well, then you realize that they're not. But it's in Conspiracies that he's reworking that he's pulling that into this universe, where he's saying, no, they were put there by the otherness in order to make a mockery of human beings and to attack human beings and all of that. To try to do something to oppose the ally on our planet. That's why the Rakoshi monsters were created. Just a tiny little element within this vast cosmic battle that's going on. And then in Legacies, you've got all this stuff with broadcast power, with Nikola Tesla, and then you think that that's fairly self-contained, but then as you're reading in Conspiracies towards the end, then you realize that they basically they are assembling the broadcast power tower that Tesla made in, I think, 1908, that you then get connected to the I can never remember how to pronounce it, but the Tunguska explosion in Siberia, right? That scientists, I believe, are still rather puzzled over, where they have not settled on exactly what it is. But if you've not looked into that before, it's really interesting. The idea being that it very likely was some kind of giant meteorite that struck Siberia, and it was the biggest blast until nuclear weapons were created, and in fact I think it was maybe contained more power than that, and they're puzzled to some degree over exactly what it was that caused it. Well, Wilson is pulling that into the secret history of the world. And in doing so, he's pulling in legacy. So he's saying, look, you have broadcast power, you have Tesla. What happened with Tesla is it's not just that he was scared by that explosion that he generated in, Siberia. Instead, what it is that he opened up a portal into this other dimension, connected to the otherness, and it was absolutely terrifying what was going on, and that the otherness wants this to happen again. And so it's been working with a few key people. So it's working with Melanie Eyler. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. It's Ehler. And then her friend Frayne Canfield. So these two people, then they were born in 1968, and this is where a little bit of my own ignorance of the series comes in. I have not read all of the Adversary Cycle books, but I'm pretty sure that this connects to Reborn. I'm assuming that's what it is, that it's reborn, in which we get that with Rosalam, who is reborn in that in Monroe in 1968, and that you get this burst of otherness that then goes after, on a genetic level, these children who are in their mother's wombs at this point. And so then you get these deformities that are where the children end up being marked by otherness. And so Melanie and Frayne, because they're connected to this, then the otherness is now working with them, Melanie in particular, to rebuild a miniature version of Tesla's tower that ultimately is going to open up a portal into, this other dimension. And so what I'm saying here is that pulls Legacies into the secret history of the world. That if you read it just on its own, you don't see the connections, but when you read Conspiracies, you do. It also then opens up, like I say, the tomb with the Rakoshi monsters. It then starts connecting to the Adversary Cycle of books, including, I'm sure, Reborn. You can comment on that because I haven't got to this yet. I'm going to get to these at the end of all the Repairman Jack books. And so you have connections there, and then F. Paul Wilson recently published Wardenclyffe, which specifically has to do with Tesla's broadcast power and that tower that he built. And so I'm assuming that, Wardenclyffe has got all these connections to Legacies, and then as well with Conspiracies. So really what you're seeing here is this grand unification of Wilson's career, and it is such a brilliant thing to kind of take part in as a reader, where you're reading Conspiracies and you're seeing how he's able to rework a book like Legacies without changing Legacies and pulling it into the secret history of the world, pulling it into the Adversary Cycle. And I think it's really fun seeing this happen, and that's what you're going to get with the rest of the Repairman Jack books as it leads up to Night World. And I think that, it's a fun little piece of metafiction that you have in this, where Wilson as a writer is trying to do this grand unification of all of his published works and bring them all together. I mean, maybe not every single one, but most of them, or the vast preponderance of them, into this secret history that he is assembling. And the reason why I'm saying that this is metafiction and metafiction is just fiction that is aware of itself, that it's operating on multiple levels. Within Conspiracies, within this text, then you have CSOOP, right? The Society for the Exposure of Secret Organizations and Programs. I forget. Exposure of Secret Organizations and Unacknowledged Phenomena. So through this, you have the character of Melanie Ayler, who she has got her grand unification theory, and she's basically trying to take all these different conspiracy theories that have existed and pull them all into this grand unifying theory where they all make sense within this framework. And that's really what Wilson is doing as well. So you've got within the text itself, you've got a character who's trying to do that for all the conspiracies that exist in the world. And then outside of the text, Wilson is doing the same thing that Melanie Ayler is doing here, where he's got his grand unifying theory going on at the same time. So that's a fun little piece of metafiction. That's not the only one that you get either. So you have this conference where it's really a conspiracy conference, a conference of a whole bunch of conspiracy theorists who have got all these different ideas, and they're all assembling together at this one hotel in New York. And that the interesting thing is, I know that F. Paul Wilson has really enjoyed going to different conventions, different writers' conventions, science fiction conventions, thriller conventions, horror conventions, and that the community aspect of that is what he enjoys. And so you've got metafiction going on there as well, because if you go to one of these conventions, then you've got people who have got all of these different interests, right? That they're not all interested in the exact same like subgenre of book or of writing, but they all come together there and they become a family of sorts, because they don't have a lot of people in their own personal lives who really get excited about these things. And that's why those conventions are so much fun for people who are really interested in that. And that's what you have within Conspiracies. But I'm saying that Wilson himself, outside of this, has also enjoyed that with different writers' conferences and book conferences. So I thought that was a fun little piece of metafiction as well. Um, like I say, you get introduced to all kinds of different characters within Conspiracies. So you get to see Sal Roma or Razalam. I'm not sure like what pronunciation you're supposed to say, if it's Razalam or Rosalam. But in any case, you get him in the book, and it's really fun seeing his interactions with Jack, because this is my first time rereading Conspiracies. I've read it like years and years ago. But then you get Razalam within the rest of the series, and then he realizes how big of a threat Jack is. And within this, like, they're just sitting down, and Razalam is like, here's the whole secret history of the world, here's the cosmic struggle, here's what's really going on. And Jack is like, I'm bored, this isn't interesting. Like, he just like dismisses him as being just another wacko who's got a ridiculous conspiracy theory, and it is all nonsense. That they're just sitting across from each other, and there's no real hostility. Mauricio, however, so Sal Roma or Razalam's, companion within this, who's I believe supposed to be his protector, who is manifesting for the most part as a monkey, but then he can grow to about 4 feet in height and becomes, much more muscular and vicious and all of that. That Mauricio, he is really hostile to Jack, and he doesn't trust Jack at all. And so that's fun getting introduced to this, seeing the way they interact with Jack, where Jack is kind of a nobody as far as the otherness is concerned, or at least Razalam, but not exactly, because that's where you get the ending of the book, where Melanie has been contacted by the otherness, and she is instructed to get Jack there when they set up this little tower that will then open up the portal into this other dimension connected to the otherness. And it's because they are angry that Jack destroyed all of the Rokoshi in the tomb, right? That he survived and that he killed them, and that they have got a score to settle with him. And that apparently, according to what happens in Conspiracies, even though Kusum, who brought the Rakoshi over, he didn't think that he was being controlled by the otherness, but apparently this was part of their plan in order to help bring about Razalam and opening up all these portals on Earth to help the otherness in. So Kusum in the tomb, who's the one who brings over the Rakoshi and gives birth to them, then he's not aware that he's part of this. And then Jack, by stopping them, doesn't realize what a big thing he's just stumbled upon. But you start getting that in Conspiracies, where you get those explanations for what's happening there. So it helps the tomb a fair bit. The tomb ends up getting pulled into this better, into the secret history of the world, after you read Conspiracies. You also get the twins in this book, where they are so much fun, especially like now that I'm rereading it, that I know who they are, I know what side they're working on. And so, of course, they are, as best I understand it and as best I remember, they basically take over for Glycan, or Glaken, I'm not sure what the pronunciation is, but you get Glaken at the end of The Keep, who basically is able to retire from his role as being a defender against Razalam on Earth, and then you get the twins who take over, but then they get sucked into that maw that pulls them into the otherness, and so the torch then gets passed on to Jack. So from this point forward, then Jack is really in it. And so that's a really interesting part with this, that Jack doesn't exactly know what's happened, but he knows that there's something. Like, he says this at the end, when the twins fall into the pit, where he says something along the lines of, he could see in their eyes that as if there was some kind of torch being passed on from one to the other. So you get that sense of what's happening there. So all of those really fun things are happening within this book. You also see some of the tactics that the Ally employs with Jack that you're going to see throughout the rest of the series. And so the twins initially, they grab Jack when they show up at the house in Monroe, and they're trying to then throw him into the pit because they're like, well, if the otherness wants Jack, and then it'll close up afterwards because then it will get what it wanted, because the otherness is angry with Jack for destroying the Rokoshi, then we'll just do that. Who cares about Jack at all? That you get to see this later on, that the ally, and it does get explained a couple times in Conspiracies, the ally is not exactly friendly to Earth, right? It's not that it's there, the ally exists to help Earth, or that it really cares. It's just it doesn't want to lose Earth because it's a piece and it's on their side, and in this vast cosmic struggle that's going on, it's probably best for them to keep this piece of the game. And so they're willing to dispense with Jack. They don't care about him. He's just a tool. So if throwing him into the pit is going to help stave off the otherness for a little bit, then just throw him into the pit. And you're going to get this later on, that Jack needs to be part of this. That he's now going to be the guardian on Earth. And so in order for him to do that, who cares, not just who cares about loved ones that he might have, but the ally is willing to sacrifice them, right? So that way Jack will have no connections, that he can be fully committed to being a protector on Earth. That you get to see that not hostility, but just indifference to who Jack is. It's just he's a tool, and that's all that they see him as. Okay, so I think that covers most of what I wanted to say, but there's just a couple other things. So you get two different subplots within this book that are really interesting, and I've thought through why Wilson is incorporating these two subplots. So early on in the book, then you've got Jack, who is going through the park. He's considering how he's going to do his annual Little League fundraiser by basically, stealing from thieves, people who mug people and do other things like that, where they steal people's money, that he steals from them, and then he gives it to the community, to the Little League, the baseball Little League that's going on within his community. That he sees this couple where, well, he sees these guys who have got a Monty table set up, right? And then he goes into this interesting little history telling us, like, the difference between Monty and three-card Monty, and how the whole setup works, all of the different role players in order to make it seem like the game is legitimate when it's really not legitimate. And that Jack he sees a couple there where the guy, I don't know if they're married, but let's say that they're married. So you've got the husband character who he's already lost a fair bit of money and he wants to play again, and the wife really doesn't want this to happen, and Jack ends up helping them, even though he would ordinarily not intervene in this kind of a situation. And I guess the question is, why does he do this? Now, this goes back to Legacies, where Gia accuses Jack of getting too comfortable with his clients, of identifying with their plight, that really being overly empathetic over what they're going through. And that is true. I mean, you see this happen, that Jack really does, despite his best efforts, he takes things personally. And that in Conspiracies, Jack has already agreed to help Lou find his wife, Melanie, who has disappeared, right? Then you find out that Lou, he absolutely loves Melanie, but she just can't help herself. She is obsessed with conspiracies. That is all that she really cares about, and she cares about them more than she cares about Lou, and she's now got herself in what Lou thinks is a really dangerous place because she just can't help where her interests lead her. She can't help herself, and she gets into trouble as a result. Well, it's the same thing here with that couple in the park, that the husband can't help himself. He gets himself into this. He can't help but gamble, thinking that he's going to win his money back. And that Jack, because of the case that he's taken on with Lou and Melanie, I think he's seeing connections there, and he's like, on a smaller scale, here's what I can do. I can help these, you know, fairly good law-abiding people get out of this bad situation by predators, by these people within the park who are just taking advantage of them as thieves and as con artists. You get that subplot, and I think that's why you have it. And then you also have this other subplot where you've got this guy, I forget his first name, but Schaefer, and then he's got his sister Seal, where his sister, she is being abused by her husband, and he doesn't know what to do, and she's absolutely in a codependent relationship with her husband, where she is apologizing for his abuse, that she thinks that it's her fault somehow. It's of course a familiar story of domestic abuse, where this has been explored a lot, and that this is as far as I understand, a fairly common psychological phenomenon within that kind of abusive relationship. Jack thinks this is not the case. I shouldn't take on this kind of a case, but he does anyway. And then part of what ends up happening is that Jack, he attacks Seal's husband. Because the husband is beating up Seal, and Jack is outside in the bushes watching this, and then he just can't help himself. He goes in pretending to be an intruder. He then confronts the guy, and then he ends up through a kind of a series of events that happen within the house. He ends up, breaking the guy's shins, I believe, both of his shins, and he's already beaten him pretty badly. But then the brother who hired Jack confronts him afterwards when he's giving him the second half of his payment, and he's like, "What is wrong with you? You're such a sick person." And Jack is like, "What are you talking about? I did what you asked me to do." And then it turns out that that husband was tortured, mutilated, and then killed. And you find out that Seal took about 3 hours with the husband, like with her husband, to do all of those things, after finding out that her husband really didn't love her, and that he stayed married to her in order to protect his job, because her brother was had an important business connection with him. And so you see this happening, and it's this really interesting thematic connection that you get, where Seal seems like a fairly docile woman who would not ever do anything violent, where she just seems safe and fairly benign, that she wouldn't do something this vicious, this violent. And I think the thematic connection here is you find out, well, no, actually, she's got a darkness within her too. And that when it gets unleashed, it's pretty frightening. And that you have the same thing with Melanie Eiler, where Lou is married to her. Melanie has disappeared. He just thinks like, well, my wife, she's in over her head. Something terrible has happened to her because she's such a good person. So how could, you have to help her, you have to save her. And it turns out that she didn't really need helping or saving. I mean, she sort of did, but she didn't want Jack to come in and help her. She was trying to lure him in, because she's working for the otherness. And it turns out that she's got a fair bit of darkness that her own husband is unaware of. And that's the thing, is within a relationship, you've got these two different couples, and it turns out that you maybe don't exactly know all these things about your spouse that you think you do. That Seal and her husband has no idea that she's capable of these things. Melanie and Lou has no idea that his wife really doesn't care about him that much, and that she's capable of doing participating in this otherness, in this really fairly malevolent thing, that she's participating in. And so I think that's where you're getting that, because I'm reading this and I'm thinking, okay, so you've got these interesting little subplots, and it's not just, I think, to fill out the book where it's like, yeah, Jack doesn't know which cases are going to be big, and he's often working multiple cases at once, and so you get some smaller, easier fixes along with big, complex, difficult fixes. And it's like, yeah, but why is Wilson choosing those smaller fixes to incorporate into this book? There's got to be some kind of interesting connection there, whether it's thematically connecting to something or just on a plot or a character level, that you're seeing connections between all of these different things that are going on. So I think that's why you get that within this book. So I would love to know what you think about Conspiracies, especially if you can, without giving away too much, but point to anything else that I'm missing, in part because I have not read all of the Adversary Cycle, particularly, with what happens in, I'm pretty sure it's got to be Reborn, Monroe, 1968, where you've got Melanie and Frayne Canfield, where they're touched by the otherness, and the birth of Razalam and all of that, that I'm sure there's other stuff going on here that I'm just not catching because I haven't read those books yet, that if you want to comment on that below, that'd be great. All right, the next one is going to be All the Rage, so you can watch for the short spoiler-free review video of that tomorrow, and then the longer discussion video will be posted next Thursday. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.